everyone. Welcome to the program. This is Sunday Politics live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimbale in Abuja. Since Friday evening, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, Nigeria's central bank governor, is being in the news, but not for the good reasons. Well, the office of the secretary to the government of the Federation released a statement that, quote, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has suspended the central bank governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, CFR, from office with immediate effect. This is a sequel to the ongoing investigation of his office and the planned reforms in the financial sector of the economy. End of quote. By morning, there were reports of his arrest, which at first the Department of State Services, the DSS, denied, but later in the day, they came out to announce to Nigerians that indeed they have arrested Mr. Emefiele. Well, in that statement, it quotes, the Department of State Services hereby confirms that Mr. Godwin Emefiele, the suspended governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, is now in its custody for some investigative reasons. And that's drew the attention of a lot of Nigerians. Since then, Nigerians have been analyzing the issues raised by the president's decision. There are legal angles to this matter because this is not the very first time a CBN governor would be suspended. In fact, Mr. Emefiele's successor was also suspended as well. The matter went to court, but part of what we might be analyzing tonight. However, Mr. Emefiele will be perhaps the only CBN governor that would have worked under 3 different presidents and also lucky to have had his tenure renewed. So he's serving a second term of 5 years, as stipulated by the CBN Act. What does the arrest mean? What are the implications of the suspension and the arrest on the CBN's activities and the economy? Tonight, we're looking at the legal angles and all of the issues that have been raised. A lot of Nigerians, eminent Nigerians, have been speaking about this and drawing the attention of the world to what has happened. Those who are differ to what the federal government has done, and those who are in support, and those who are drawing some caution. And that's Mr. Emefiele, who is said to have been arrested in some part of Lagos, taken to the airport via a private jet and flown to Abuja. Tonight, I'm being joined by a very senior lawyer and human rights activist, Mr. Clement Nwanko. He joins us virtually from Abuja. Thank you so much, Mr. Nwanko, for joining us. And let me begin by asking tonight, just like a lot of Nigerians, I'd like to know how the news of Mr. Emefiele's suspension came to you.
Well, certainly not unexpected, but as a lawyer, I am very much more concerned about due process, and I am very much concerned about following the constitutionality in doing this. Everyone knew, of course, that Mr. Emefiele was going to come to a sad end because of the way that he has managed the central bank, because of the lack of professionalism that he's exhibited in his work, and because he really crossed the boundaries of professionalism. So it was quite clear that he was going to be out of the CBN. The question was when and who would do it. I think what is really disappointing, of course, is that when you look at the laws that establish the CBN, the Central Bank Act, there are provisions for removing a governor of the central bank. And I think for all of us who are watching the situation, it's a question really to ensure that we follow due process. This is a government where you do have a new president who has just come in. For a very long time, we had President Jonathan, of course, but this is a civilian who has emerged as president. So the concern for me is to be sure that we follow due process, not just because we want to lay precedents, but also really because of the economic implications. In normal climes, the economy will be in turmoil right now. The currency will be in turmoil as a result of a central bank governor being suspended from office. we could go into that discussion, but really there is no provision in the CBN Act that allows for the central bank governor to be suspended by the president. The unfortunate thing is, of course, the role of the National Assembly, the Senate particularly, which had the power to confirm him, but which has failed woefully to intervene. And you can stretch this to several other aspects of the Nigerian situation to see how much the Senate has failed in its oversight responsibilities and in its powers of appointing and removal of public officials.
Before I come into the legality and the sections, relevant sections upon which the appointment and the removal of a central bank governor, it does look like the law that is guiding the activities of the CBN also recognize the role of the deputy governor just as much it recognizes the role of the CBN. And so in so many of those clauses, it talked about the CBN governor and the deputy governor of the CBN. But before I come to that, Mr. Nwankwo, can you tell us what are those infractions or alleged infractions that are obvious? It does look to me that the suspension of Mr. Emefiele came as a very popular conversation and discourse for Nigerians. I mean, would you describe his suspension as something that came as perhaps a popularly accepted decision of the government?
Well, I do not think that you can apply the law as a popularity issue. It's a question of following process. Mr. Emefiele's reputation across the country is something that we all are concerned about, but certainly I think that the question of whether his arrest is popular or not is really not the conversation.
Because one thing that is also very important is also the interest of Nigerians. One thing that the law says is one thing also whether the government is also trying to pander to the feelings and the feelers that he's getting from the people of Nigeria. But let me ask quickly, what are those infractions, the obvious one and perhaps the not obvious one, that you imagine that Mr. Emefiele would have set before himself as landmines?
I'm not sure I can imagine what the infractions are. We will have to see from the authorities what the allegations are against him. And let's not forget that under the law, he is deemed innocent until charged to court and proven guilty. So at this time, it would not be very useful to engage with the mob in stoning Mr. Emefiele. But certainly I think that given his very crucial role in the economy and as an observer who has observed his work, it was quite clear that his role as CBN governor, which is dealing with the monetary policies of the country, has not necessarily aligned with the physical side of things. Of course, the CBN is an independent institution. It's set up to be independent by the CBN Act, but you must align your monetary policies with the fiscal policies. And I think that clearly even the Ministry of the Federal Minister of Finance, the Federal Minister of Budget and National Planning were very disappointed in their inability to work with him. He never really worked with them. He always constantly ran to the president, the former president, Muhammadu Buhari, rather than having a coordinated conversation and coordinated work with the Minister of Finance that is his closest ministry. Secondly, I think he dabbled a lot into politics. And if we look at the EndSARS protest of 2020, we saw how the institution of the central bank was used to muzzle people who the CBN identified or claimed to have identified as ringleaders of that protest, which was a valid protest against police brutality in this country and which remains unresolved. The CBN governor was very active in clamping down on several of those that it said were involved in those protests. A lot of bank accounts were frozen. Some banks, in fact, suffered suffered penalties for the banking services they provided to the leaders of the NSAS protest. And then the most heinous, I would say, was trying to run for elections in the primaries of the ruling party, the APC. The Central Bank Act was quite clear in saying that you couldn't take up any other position being governor of Central Bank, and quite clear as well about non-partisanship. So I think it was quite brazen to see people addressing press conferences, people claiming that they had bought nomination forms for a central bank governor. This is completely unprecedented. There is no doubt that removing the central bank governor is a popular decision. I think it's welcome. But my point about it is that it requires to be done with due process. The president has no powers to suspend the CBN governor. The Senate, which had the power to confirm him, should have been the one acting. They should have acted long before now. I think the Senate, we need to look at how the 10th Senate would take things forward, but the 9th Senate was not very able to respect and implement its powers. And we saw that even more recently with these elections that have just been conducted, that you saw the president, President Buhari, announce the suspension of a resident electoral commissioner from Zamfara for his alleged infractions. Again, the president has no powers to remove anybody from the Electoral Commission. The Senate has those powers, and the Senate should be responsible enough and accountable to Nigerians to not only confirm the right persons, but also ensure that where they infringe on the laws that create those positions, that they can act to remove such an appointee. And I think that the Senate takes a lot of responsibility for a central bank governor that really went beyond the call of duty and went beyond his powers and acted in a way that was very, very much in contradiction of the role of the CBN governor.
I mean, there was an article published today in an online newspaper written by Professor Chidi Odinkalu, which he titled Godwin Emefiele's Overdue Deserts. In that, he chronicled a lot of infractions. He alleged that the CBN governor had involved himself with, some of which you have mentioned tonight. Some of these issues bordering on morality and breaching of the authority of his office, and the issue of involvement in politics even while holding the office of the CBN governor. Professor Odinkalu mentioned in that article the involvement of the CBN led by Mr. Emefiele and the National Theatre Project, the fact that there were pending legal issues hanging over that project. He mentioned the issues of Ovation assets, which was another controversial issue about Mr. Emefiele. He also allegedly mentioned holding of alleged offshore accounts by Mr. Godwin Emefiele. He mentioned several other things, but in all of this, there is something that Mr. Femi Falana had said, Mr. Nwankwo, which I'd like you to comment on. Let me read what Mr. Falana said. It was somewhat just cautioning based on what happened in the case of Bukola Saraki and his trial. And he said that the reason why that trial failed, basically, he said, quote, in the case of Dr. Bukola Saraki versus the Federal Republic of Nigeria, he went further to say that the Supreme Court ruled that the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission lacks the vials to investigate and prosecute the appellant for the breach of the provisions of the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act. It was for that principal reason that Senator Saraki was freed by the Apex Court. Leonard Sake went further to now warn that the DSS should then be very careful. It says that they cannot go in the manner in which they're going, and they need to be careful. He said, in line with the principle of law illustrated by the Apex Court in Saraki's case, that the DSS lacks the power to investigate and prosecute Mr. Emefiele in respect of allegations of money laundering and other economic crimes. Therefore, after investigating the alleged involvement of Mr. Emefiele in terrorism financing, that the DSS should transfer him to the EFCC, and the purpose of investigating the allegations of money laundering and allied offenses. Otherwise, the investigation of the case will be bungled by the DSS. What are your views on those comments, Mr. Nwankwo?
I think both lawyers are very senior lawyers. Professor Chidi Odinkalo, Femi Falana, of course, we know how vast his experience and knowledge is. And so these are comments not to be taken very lightly at all. And you can go on and on. There would be, hundreds of allegations that could come up. But the most important thing is always that in taking up a case, it would be to set the precedent so that lessons can be taken. I think that when you follow the mob, then you really, at the end of the day, rush in and act very unprofessionally. I agree with the Leonard Silk, Femi Falana, that the DSS has no responsibility to investigate this matter. It should be the responsibility of the EFCC, of course, and it's going to be up to these presidents to also understand that in a constitutional democracy where the rule of law takes precedence, that the appropriate authorities should be the one doing so. We must also not forget the fact that whatever the gravity of the allegations are against Mr. Emefiele, he is at this time presumed innocent until proven guilty. And so the protection of the law and the benefits of the law also need to be given to him, which means that even though he's arrested, he cannot be kept in custody indefinitely. He would be entitled to bail, so he should be charged to court. And the Constitution is quite clear about how long you can hold any person. But certainly there is no doubt from what you have said and from the feelings across the country that the levels of anger, and I think this came to a head in the so-called currency, I would say currency recoloring, but Mr. Emefiele called it coloring, changing the colors of the currency and inflicting incredible pain and hardship. Nigerians died during his so-called currency recoloring exercise. People lost their means of livelihood. The sense of it was that he was doing it for political purposes, and as we can see today, there is no evidence that in fact, it would seem to me that that exercise is a failure in itself, and it will be a question to investigate those involved in that very painful and hardship-inflicting exercise to ensure that for the future, because that's the ultimate at the end of the day, for the future, that these things do not occur with the levity that we saw it happen under Mr. Emefiele as a CBN governor. But again, we have to go back to the law. It also tells you who should be appointed to act in his capacity. And indeed, there is really no provision for you to have an acting CBN governor. So you might say, okay, he's resigned, or you have removed him or suspended him from office. Again, there's no constitutional or legal provision for suspending a CBN governor. And I would expect that the president will immediately, the Senate and the National Assembly is inaugurated in the coming days, put a motion across or get the Senate to pass a motion removing him by 2/3 majority of the Senate. And it would seem to me that this would be a popular decision that the Senate can very easily give. But I would think that we need to follow due process for the purpose that you might indeed have a CBN governor in the future who refuses to be a tool in the hands of the executive and yet may be suspended from office simply because he refuses to be a tool in the hands of the executive. So I do think that for legal purposes, for precedent purposes, the president should do the right thing. Getting the DSS to arrest Mr. Emefiele, it should be that he's handed over to the appropriate investigating and prosecuting authorities, but also that he should be removed from office only by a vote in the Senate of 2/3 majority of members of the Senate who would then be acting in line with the law. And I keep saying this, we have to look at precedents, we have to ensure that we follow our laws, and we have to follow due process. But certainly the anger in Nigeria about the CBN governor is deep, and I think that a lot of people would feel that he has come to his just end as CBN governor.
Let me take you back to the question as to the powers of the president. In either, there is no doubt that the president, as the appointer of that of the occupant of that role, but then whether or not he has the powers that we've seen in the case of the former CBN governor, and who is now the governor of, the former emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido. But he went to court, but whether or not that is enough to for as a lesson for the nation, let's look at what the law says, and perhaps it might give us some insight, Mr. Nwanko, tonight. In the section 11, subsection 2, C and F of that subsection, I like to quote and read from them. It says, quote, "The governor, the deputy governor or director shall cease to hold office in the bank if he is guilty of a serious misconduct in relation to his duties under this act." Then the F portion says, if he's removed by the president, provided that the removal of the governor shall be supported by 2/3 majority of the Senate, praying that he is so removed. Can you please expatiate further on what this provision says?
Yeah, the provision, again, buttresses the point that I've been making, section 11 that you have quoted of the law, section 11 talks 2F, says that, and this is the F, is removed by the president. And the provided there is a proviso, which means that you cannot act without following the provision of this law. The removal of the governor shall be supported by 2/3 majority of the Senate, praying that he be so removed, which means that you don't go back. You don't go to the Senate after you have removed him. You actually would have to pray to the Senate that he be removed. And suspension is removal. There is no provision that says you can suspend the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And I'm saying this not, everyone knows that Emefiele has his issues, and we really do not want a central bank governor that would operate with such unprofessionalism. But the real thing is also that you could have a central bank governor that is so very professional, so very focused on giving his best to the country, so very much ensuring that there is due process, as to rankle and offend a president who is sitting in office and who just wants a CBN governor who they can ride roughshod over. The provision of this law is to ensure that the law protects such a CBN governor, and that's why it is important. And I don't see what the rush is, unless you fear that the CBN governor is about to flee the country and is unable to answer to the charges against him. But otherwise, I would think that what is important for the president to do, and you did have the Senate sitting up till only it had its valedictory yesterday. You did have the Senate sitting till a few days ago. The president could have gone to the Senate and asked the Senate to remove him. And given the groundswell of public support for such a move, there is no way that the Senate would not have removed a governor who everyone has really been very concerned about his unprofessional conduct.
So you think that the decision or the order of the president was illegal on Emefiele?
I think it is illegal, and I feel sad to say so, but I think it's illegal. I think that given the issues around Mr. Emefiele, given his inability to run a CBN very professionally, quite frankly, a lot of us wondered how the economy hasn't even further crumbled as a result of Mr. Emefiele's unprofessionalism. I keep using those words. But I think that for all times, it's important to follow due process. We are running a constitutional system of government. We are running a government of rule of law. And I mean, you can imagine, could it ever happen in serious democracies, in serious economies, that you could remove, for instance, the Fed chairman in the US, or remove the head of the Bank of England? It would be unfathomable. The currency of those countries would collapse instantly. So I think that if we are practicing democracy, we need to institutionalize practices that help us to entrench democracy. And I think that we should follow the process of removal of the CBN governor for the purposes of precedence and the respect for our own processes.
All right, quickly, Mr. Nwankwo, there is a court declaration from Justice M.A. Hassan, which asked that Mr. Emefiele should not be harassed, intimidated, threatened, restricted for free movement, abuse of his right of office, and in fact should not be arrested. And that declaration of court subsists. In that light, what are your views on the arrest and in view of the court order?
I think it's useful to begin to query some of these court orders that are given. It wouldn't be the first that you have seen such an order given by a court. If you are, as a court, making an order to prevent someone being arrested in anticipation of a future crime. So someone goes to court and perhaps knows that they're about to commit a crime. They go to court and get an order to say, don't arrest me, or don't do this, or don't do that. I think the courts would need to be very careful with some of these orders that are made, because if an order is made in anticipation of committing a crime, then I think that the question of jurisdiction of the court would come in. But the appropriate thing, of course, to do would have been, one, to appeal against such a decision of a court, but secondly, actually, to raise with the National Judicial Council some of these orders that the courts make that, quite frankly, have their implications on the rule of law.
There are those who argue, Mr. Nwankwo, that a suspension is an administrative process which the president is empowered to exercise under our rule of law principle. That suspension does not mean removal. That in that sense, Section 11 may not be in breach. The president may not have acted in breach of that section. What's your view on that?
The president is not part of the administrative structure of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And we raised these concerns when the threat was on with the former CBN governor, former emir of Kano, Lamido Sanusi. This was under the Jonathan administration. And we'll continue to raise it. It's the same point I've also raised, and it doesn't matter how anybody feels about the situation in Adamawa State. You need to do the things, with the resident electoral commissioner there who acted in a rogue manner. You needed to ensure, and the Senate, actually, again, it's a failing. The INEC itself should not have recommended to the president to remove or suspend a rec. Because you could in future, and we know we have these challenges with the current election where everybody is so upset with the conduct of the 2023 general elections, given the failings of it. But the truth is that if someone has been not able to live up to their oath of office, and they've been confirmed by the Senate, the appropriate place to go to is the Senate. A suspension is a removal. Even a suspension for a period, for 1 day, is a removal. It's not an administrative action, and even if it was, the president has no place in the administrative and daily runnings of the center.
But Mr. Nwankwo, apologies to Burton. In the case of the suspension of Mr. Lamido Sanusi at a time in 2014, I guess, and I'm not sure there is anyone that has appealed that judgment. The court ruled at the time that, yes, the president does not have the power to remove the governor by himself, but he does have the power to suspend the CBN governor. That was a position of the court at the time, and that has not been appealed. Would that precedent of court suffice in this case?
No, the law is quite clear, and I wish it was appealed. I haven't read that judgment in its entirety, but I wish it was appealed. The law is very clear in Section 11. You have read it. It says that provided that the removal of the governor shall be supported by 2/3 majority of the Senate, praying that he be so removed. And if you look at interpretations, I don't have the interpretation act here, but if you look at interpretation of suspension is part of the definition of removal. You are removing him from his duties, even if it is a temporary removal. And in this case, clearly we don't see that the CBN governor's suspension is a temporary removal. It would seem to me that his job is over. And I don't think Nigerians regret that his job is over. I think that given the pain and given the damage he has inflicted on the economy, he should have been removed by the Senate a long time ago. Indeed, he should not even have been confirmed for a second term when the Senate did so. But clearly, I think that for the purposes of precedence, for the purposes of rule of law, we need to follow our laws as they are. And I do not think that any Senate sitting can refuse to remove a CBN governor that has acted in the way that Mr. Emefiele has acted.
Well, Mr. Nwankwo, we are due for a break, but I have just a very short question, and it's about the President Tinubu administration. He's ended his second week in office, but there are a lot of burden on his shoulder at the moment. I just like a comment from you, but we're going to break, and I get that as your closing thought for us on this program. We'll be right back, and we'll also look at the National Assembly politics. Indeed, we understand now some breaking news coming that Honorable Betara and Honorable Yusuf Gagdi have both stepped down for Honorable Tajuddin Abbas. But what we do not know is whether Senator Abdulaziz Yari has stepped down for Senator Godswill Akpabio, and that election will happen in another 2 days. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone. We turn our attention to the National Assembly and what will become a very heated politics and leadership election that we'll see on Tuesday. But before we get to talk to my next guest, let me get just in 60 seconds a final moment with Mr. Clement Nwankwo, a senior lawyer and right activist that we've been speaking with earlier before that break. We've seen second week of President Tinubu's government, and now we're going into the third week. What are your views on the decision that it takes going forward, especially in those critical areas that affect the lives and livelihood of Nigerians directly?
Thank you, Sean. Whatever anybody thinks of the election, I think that we all know that we wish the president success with his administration. The country is in terrible, terrible shape. The economy is in crisis. The disunity levels are exceedingly very high. We expect that the president will act as a unifier of this country, understand that there's lots of injustices that have been perpetrated by the General Buhari administration, and really work towards healing the country, which means that in making appointments to the president needs to be very conscious of the need to be equitable, to be just to all. If he were not to do so, if he were to be act in the same way as Buhari did, then the country will get into further crisis. So my hope is that the president knows what to do, makes the right appointments, not based on sentiments or based on tribalism or even partisan considerations, but mostly in terms of getting the country unified. We wish him well, and whatever happens with the courts will happen, but certainly we do wish that the president succeeds and hope that he acts in the interest of the country and not in some of the parochial ways that we have seen the former president act.
For example, we've been hearing the names of the likes of Nuhu Ribadu for the position of the NSA, and those who argue that other than going the usual way of getting a military man for that position, maybe it might be the decision that the president might want to consider, that those who say professionals need to also be considered for the role of the economic advisor. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, quite frankly, I think the president has to make his choices. Those choices should be based on his understanding of the individual's ability to deliver. And that individual has, of course, to be an individual who understands the duties and responsibilities of that office, who is able to do so, who has the capacity, and this cuts across all positions. So we do hope that the president makes the right choices. We wish him well in making those decisions, but certainly acting in the best national interest is what is most important.
Mr. Clement Nwankwo, thank you so much indeed for your time tonight. Right activist and a very senior lawyer. Thank you so much indeed for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon.
The 9th National Assembly in both chambers of the National Assembly have drawn the curtains of their activities, meaning all that concern the lawmaking process with that dispensation have now come to an end. There were valedictory sessions by both chambers, which was largely filled with remembrance of memory moments that have been spent there, some emotional speeches and reactions. But how do you write the story of the 9th Assembly under the Lawan and Gbajabiamila leadership? This week, the 10th National Assembly will be inaugurated, and the politics of the leadership has been very intense. Today, we understand that Honorable Betara and Honorable Yusuf Gagdi have both stepped down for Honorable Tajuddin Abbas. This came after a meeting with the Vice President, Senator Kashim Shettima, and both of them have announced their unification plan to work with Honorable Tajuddin Abbas, who is the candidate of the APC. But in the Senate, we understand that there are those who do still agree with the party going with Senator Godswill Akpabio, the likes of Senator Abdulaziz Yari, the likes of Senator Oju Okalu, Senator Sani Musa. They still say they're going ahead onto the very final moment. But where does this take the party? I have joining me tonight a very senior lawmaker who is now returning to the Senate, a member of the PDP from Bauchi State, indeed, Senator Abdul Nengi. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Congratulations.
It's a pleasure.
Election.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
There are those who have criticized the 9th National Assembly. They draw the curtains, they're over. But they said, look, it's more or less a rubber stamp. You've been in that chamber before. Do you think that they were more or less pandering too much to the executive?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to call them rubber stamp. I know the politics of the National Assembly, and I understand how they came about, and I understand how their party functions, coupled with the fact that they had a military leader, the president of the country, who, in my opinion, while he was there, probably thought democracy should just be a one line, a straight line. And I believe democracy has to do with decent opinion freedom. They have done what they needed to do, a pass mark for them, but because of the experience of the leadership of the House, in the presence of my friend Baja and Dr. Ahmed Lawal, who have been there severally, I think they should have done better. But they've done their very best. And throughout their tenure, there was no crisis, there was no impeachment. that means it's being accepted by their colleagues. They're being accepted by their colleagues. So it's all right.
Interesting. But if you look at the 10th National Assembly, the way it's going, do you have fears that maybe if the executive have so much role to play in who becomes the leader of the presiding officers in the National Assembly, this kind of criticism might come in the way of the National Assembly? Do you have that feeling?
I absolutely believe that. I have that fear. I have that nervousness. What is happening today in this country, as far as the politics of the National Assembly is concerned, is unnecessary, uncalled for, and are actually very disturbing. Because for over 2 decades now, we have been having National Assembly with some attendant crisis. Beginning from 1999, when we had Senator Honorable Buhari, who had to be forced outside of the National Assembly, and then we had the crisis with Ete, we had crisis with Tambuwal, and my sister was there. Akande. At the Senate, we also had crisis during AWRM, Chubo Kadibo. We had crisis during the Senator Bukola Saraki. I thought those times, those moments, must have provided us with ample opportunity in making sure that those crises that happen because of the absence of institutional memory. Now we have. Why should we have this crisis as we are having? Why should the executive come out to say, for instance, we are asking somebody specifically, bring out a name, to say you must support him? Why would you do that? As an opposition member, it is not my business.
Well, I mean, Senator, with your experience in the National Assembly, your party played, in fact, a more active role when you were the party with the majority.
Yeah.
Why do you think APC should do anything less than that?
Because while our party was doing that, what was the benefit? What was the benefit?
You think that a party should be left, should just stay away from...
The party can always have a say. But behind the scene, you can't be...
Compared to what happened, because I know we always want to mirror the federal system in the United States. And if you look at what happened in the United States, it's almost a giving on who is the leader, the most senior, the party's decision, the position on who becomes the speaker in the House. And it's almost giving that they go into the chamber to do the election with a preconceived candidate from the party's position. Why is Nigeria's own different?
I think ours is a developing democracy. I think we are not yet there, but we're going to be there for some time. Even at the United States, even with the United States, even though you're a senior, but there are also people who can contest against you. And then it is left for you to be able to sell your own person, sell your own, just like McCarthy did. He had challenges before he became the U.S. Speaker. But by and large, after some times, he was able to sell himself. Shaun, I'm telling you, all the candidates that emerge, all the aspirants, are very good enough. From Fabio, from Nyari, from Osita, from Kalu, from Sani. They are people that we all know. Some of them are colleagues, some of them are friends.
Where do you differ? What do you see as a problem with the APC's position?
The problem with the APC position is the interruption. The unbecoming interruption of who become. They are members of the same party. They know themselves. 2 days ago, Fabio came to address us, Minority Caucus. And I raised this question with him. So you are putting us in a very precarious situation.
What's that situation?
Why don't you as a party, close the door? You, Fabio, call Yari, call Sani, call Osita, call Kalu. Why don't you just, the four of you, sit down, look at yourselves, and then trade this position amongst yourselves.
Have you been offered money to vote for anybody?
Money? A sitting senator being offered money, or an elected senator being offered money? Why should the money play a role in electing a presiding officer of the National Assembly?
Is money not playing a role?
Who is saving a presiding officer?
Is money not playing a role at the moment?
As far as I'm concerned, maybe in the future, maybe as we go further. And money had also played a role in the emergence of candidates at the primary level. So if you say money will be used, I won't doubt that. That money is being used at the moment.
Down the line, before Tuesday, you think money can play a significant role in determining who emerges?
It's possible, but I don't think money will now play a central role.
The meeting that was held with the Vice President today, Kashim Shettima, alongside former Governor Akpabio, who is the touted candidate of the APC. The APC is saying that they have about 70 senators already. Does that, and I'd like to know, who are you supporting? I assume you are a Yari man.
I'm a Yari man. I'm working for him, but my vote is not for him for now. Because I'm an opposition, just listen to me, an opposition candidate, and we are 50 of us, and we have said more than 15 times, and we have drafted a resolution for all members of the opposition. And we have sent in those resolutions to Yari, to Sani Musa, to Akpabio, to Osita, and to Kalu. Anybody who abides by what we demand.
What are those demands?
Positions of responsibility in the House. Not a winner takes all. So we agreed within ourselves. Yes, you can speak for Yari. I have spoken for Yari. There are other members of the opposition who are also speaking for Osita. Some are for Akpabio. But in totality, our position will be taken, God's willing, by tomorrow. So we're waiting the replies.
The president met with some members-elect. Were you part of that?
I was in Bauchi then, yeah. But I had the discussion.
Were you invited?
Yeah, I was invited through the opposition platform. Some people are personally invited. I wasn't personally invited, but we have an opposition platform that sent in invitation. Unfortunately, I was in Bauchi, I couldn't meet up with the meeting. But let me tell you one thing that actually agitates my mind. For the very first time in the history of this country, we have a president who was a senator, a vice president who was a senator, a secretary to the government who was a senator, a chief of staff who was a member of the House, a first lady who was a senator. If we cannot put our acts together, how do we begin to project this country? This country are crushing. We are crashing. And we need this president from the onset to create a level playing field. Let this transition be seamless. He is the father of all. But for people to be taking his name and campaigning with his name, I think it's uncalled for and it's unnecessary.
Is it true that there have been threats, possible threat of arrest on Senator Yari, on some of you who are supporting? Is that true? I can honorably tell you, when I was coming to this channel, and a friend called me and wanted to see me, wanted to go to my house, and said, where I am. I said, I'm heading to China's. He said, no, don't go. I said, why not? He said, ask them to Zoom you. I said, why not? He said, some of you people are targeted. I said, targeted for what? That he understand that Yari will be stopped from entering. He understand that some people will be arrested. My God, I do not think it is possible with this current president. That I know his democratic credentials is there for anybody to see. And I'm very assured, I'm very concerned that some people are creating booby traps to this man that has democratic credentials, from a decade to be governor, to be leader of the party. We all know him. So why should this thing change overnight? Senator, on a final note, Do you think Yari can spring a surprise on Tuesday?
Everything is possible in the Senate. The National Assembly, until it is done, you never can see who will win. Yari is doing his best. Akpabio is doing his best.
How many people are on Yari's side now?
According to what you do, about 60, 67 or thereabout.
And he needs how many to win?
He needs
Just
56. 56, 55.
He has enough to win.
I think he can win with the number.
Senator Abdul Ningi, thank you so much indeed for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
I appreciate
it. Yeah.
And just before we go, everyone, here is my final word. Tonight, we address our new president directly, urging him to sustain and build public trust in these critical times. Nigerians' expectations are soaring, and this might just be our last beacon of hope. I'm here tonight before you today with an appeal that carries the weight of the hopes and dreams of millions of Nigerians. Don't forget, Mr. President, the percentage of Nigerians who voted for you compared to those who did not, there are more people who did not approve of you, and to this effect, some of the parties are in court challenging the outcome of the process, but as that go on, we have a country to run. We now find ourselves at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. We stand united, filled with a fervent desire for change, progress, and a brighter future for Nigeria. The responsibilities that rest on your shoulders are immense, and we are watching closely, yearning for genuine leadership that reflects the will and aspirations of the Nigerian people. Our nation is largely divided along ethnic and religious lines. You must immediately find creative ways to sew the holes in the fabric of our nation and let everyone, no matter where they are from, feel like a member of the family once again. Without unity, it will be hard to make progress. Mr. President, we implore you to be proactive, to be a beacon of truth in the face of adversity. Nigeria has been plagued by corruption, inefficiencies, and broken promises for far too long. It is time for a paradigm shift. Show us through your actions and policy that this administration will be different. Set the tone early on by demanding accountability from every corner of government and by making decisions that prioritize the collective welfare of our people. Don't be deceived by the sycophants. A lot of people out there don't trust your abilities but disappoint them. By doing right by Nigerians, President, you cannot compensate political allies with key roles that affect the very core of our existence as a people. No mediocrity can be allowed. Get the very best of us to do the job. Dear President, remember that empathy is the lifeblood of good governance. Connect with the Nigerian people on a human level. Understand their struggles, their hopes, and their dreams. Step into the shoes and let their stories guide your decision-making process. By doing so, you will foster a government that is not detached from the realities on the ground, but intimately connected to the heartbeat of our nation. Decency, dear President, is a foundation upon which trust is built. It is an essential virtue that must permeate every aspect of your administration. Treat every citizen with respect, regardless of their background or social status. Uphold the principles of justice and fairness, and let the rule of law be the guiding force behind your actions. Nigerians crave an administration that serves as a moral compass, and your commitment to decency will ensure that our faith in government is restored. In conclusion, dear President, the weight of expectation upon your shoulder is immense, but do not let it daunt you. Embrace this opportunity to be a true servant of the Nigerian people. Be proactive, truthful, empathetic, and decent in all that you do. Show us that this administration will be different, that our dreams will not be dashed, and that hope will not be extinguished. The Nigerian people are counting on you, President Tinubu, and together we can forge a nation that is the envy of the world. May your tenure be remembered as a turning point, the moment when Nigeria rose to its full potential. President Tinubu, we would like to remind and not alarm you. We shall continue within the dictate of our constitutional obligations as journalists to hold you and your team accountable. We will scrutinize your actions and inactions. We will ask tough questions, and we will push your government to do the right thing, but we will not stop at inspiring you and your team to be the leader we all yearn for. Together, let's shape a Nigeria that shines bright with integrity, progress, and the fulfillment of our collective aspirations. Good night, and may God bless Nigeria, everyone. And that's my final word tonight. I'm Sean Kimberley. Bye-bye.